Yes.
So, as a parent, if you don't feel like this is being incorporated, from like a principal standpoint, a teacher standpoint, I don't know if it's but what it really is too, because it does talk about also including family in this as well, so.
Yeah, when you need to. Hopefully you don't need to because that's a lot of time away. If we get really good, we call you when it's a necessary thing like everything else. So if we can handle it, right? It's not, there's a big issue parents are usually called, right? But it's not an everyday thing. If I pull two kids aside or have a small group for something to happen, I don't know that we need a parent there, right? It's just a way to do that. But if people are not using it, they might not be trained. There is certainly a group here in Forest Hills that were trained before the pandemic, and they'll say, I just probably need to get a refresher tomorrow because I'm not using it as much as I used to because I don't feel comfortable and I don't want to get it wrong, which is a real thing here where people don't want to get it wrong. But it would be, we can talk a different time, but knowing who's actually trained, and if they're not, then it can backfire if you're not trained, right? And so one of the things that we found out, and someone wrote in their notes today, is that if you're trying to do a circle, the first thing you don't do is force kids to be in a circle who don't want to be there. A circle is when we're at the place where we can have the conversation and I know my part and I've had a separate board question and I've owned it. If I put someone in a circle that has not owned it, I'm going to do further harm to the victim. And sometimes that happens because people take those questions and like, okay, this is good. I'm going to get all the questions answered. The child is very young. We've had some pretty significant issues with that. So it would have to be, are they trained, both of them? You know, so I'd be interested in that. And we're just not across the board. It has not been an expectation so far.
It says it in
Because we can,
Okay.
but I'm saying, like, it's at our use, you know what I'm saying? It's a resource. It's like, it's not currently mandated. So if they're not, it could be because, but I want you to feel okay by saying, hey, I went to this thing, it's really cool. Are you guys thinking about using it? Or you could, I don't mind if you tell me later, I can say, hey, I have one of your parents, super interested, any thoughts? To do so respectfully.
Yeah, that's funny you say that because I think my son he had participated in one, multiple whole group of kids in regards to, there was an incident on lots of kids were acting up. And it was funny, not all of them, they weren't upset that they were in the circle. There was maybe 7, 8, 9 of them. But they were so upset because they did this circle or this talking during recess. And it completely backfired because all the kids were so upset because they were missing recess. So you talk about, timing. So you said, so they weren't willing participants, right? They did not want to be willing participants.
We'll do this, we've got to finish our game, and we'll be back. Like, we do want to get to the bottom of it, yeah.
So,
Yeah, it makes a difference, yeah. Unless there was something going on that needs to be addressed at a time, sometimes you can't finish your game if you got to address a problem. But yes, that's one of those things. What other questions do you have?
I guess, how do you do PBIS without having everyone trained in restorative practices? I mean, I know they're different things. I feel like they go hand in hand.
No, they are. So because PBIS is a framework that you can drop things in, there are schools that drop capturing kids' hearts and love and logic into PBIS because it's such a framework. Like it takes Central has something called One Task, put that in there because it will handle whatever cool things you have going on. So I think they're tied together technically. When we talk about restorative practices, that it is the plate by which you set things on, because sometimes as educators we're like, there's a lot on our plates, I think restorative practices is that plate that you serve by, but unless you have the training, you won't know that. So I would say there are certainly places that have had restorative practices PBIS for years and doing a great job and have not been restorative practice trained. It just is so much better. I'm trying to separate myself and be unbiased. That could it happen? I'm sure there are places doing it. It just is so much better with restorative because you can not only decrease those incidents, but you're also working on that environment and that culture. like that accountability and that ownership, and I get kind of like, when people think restorative practices doesn't have any teeth, but man, when you can get a child to admit and then they own their behavior, and you're like, oh, well, good, you tell your dad, I don't have to say anything, because you got the words out, you were able to think through it, and you're like, I was thinking about this, I was doing this, I should have done it, I know like, that's what we want our kids to be able to process and be able to say, that was my part. Yeah, I have to own my part. So we want kids to have ownership, take responsibility, but we want them to know that you make a mistake, that doesn't define you. We want to be a part of an environment that doesn't tag and label kids by the thing they did. And so we gotta get sure that as well. I just remember you from the thing 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Like, come on now, girl. Let's get to the next day now. Soapbox, really down. Where was I? What was the question? Yeah. More questions. Yes.
Like, somehow it's not like mandated across the district or something like that for every school or everybody, but I'm just curious, like, as you keep offering training several times a year and more of our staff are trained, like, is that the goal for all schools to do the same restorative practices? And like, at the leadership level, like, do principals decide, like, for their school, like, hey, at our school we're doing this? Or is it more on like a teacher-to-teacher basis?
Right now, I would say all of the above. I think there are principals who do not play. They get a new staff. They're like, Tamasha, sign them up for the next one. Like I've got schools that have 90. Like it's just a part of what you're gonna do. Whatever the next one is, you go. We'll cover you. So there are schools who feel that way, and other people, like it's 2 days, right? So, and there are teachers, who got wind of it back in 2017 and have not let it go. So I think we'll see. My goal is to offer it to the new suit. We'll have lots of offerings and lots of people asking him things like, what do you think about restorative practices? Did you do that? I know that he had some CKH, some cancer in his heart, so, I've got a little list. But I would say, how do you feel about that? And have you had any interaction? I don't know how soon he would say, and I want everyone to be restorative, but I certainly am going to offer it and talk about those benefits if he's not had that. And that's what's hard, right? Because you gotta have subs. I mean, those things that after the pandemic that became so hard with having a training that is just fundamentally changing mentally and like that sort of thing. It takes 2 days. There is no 1-day version, and there's a good reason for that. To do it right when you're dealing with people, their emotions, their feelings, and consequences. Like you want to get it right, and so those 2 days that can feel like a lot. If you're building, subs are an issue, so you can't, yes, I want my whole kindergarten team trained, like, 2 days, so we gotta figure that out.
Does that count towards their continuing education?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Get sketchies.
Okay.
Definitely get sketchies. Yeah.
Just as a follow-up, I'm just curious, like, it seems like the type of thing that obviously would be more effective the more staff in the school are trained. So like, is it, I don't know, how do they manage that when there's like three teachers in a building who are trying to use restorative practices and like, because so many like disciplinary issues and stuff are gonna involve multiple teachers, like multiple staff that are involved in incident or happen, things like that. Like, how do you run a restorative practices? Like, you're maybe the one who's trained in trying to do it, but like other staff or people who are involved, like either aren't trained and don't know, or like could potentially be like not supportive of it, like I don't want to do it. How do you have that like conflict with that, or one person's trying to embrace it and do it, but the other people aren't on board?
I think the best part about restorative practice is like anything else that's good. Whenever you do it, it's generally good, especially if you know what you're doing. So you're not going to harm anything. But you can. But I don't know that if a person who knows how to do it came up to someone and said, "Hey, I want to do this restorative thing with you, but I know you don't know it, so let me run it." It's going to be situational. It's like influencing what you can influence, what you can influence. So if that's how you run your class, or if you're on recess duty, that's because it's knowing how to, you don't need any props for it, right? You don't need any materials. It's you interacting and building those relationships and answering those questions appropriately. So it doesn't harm anything that other people don't know how to do it. Now, again, especially if you're in charge of processing that situation. Are there times that you'll say, that would have been great if that had been processed through, a restorative lens? Yes. Yeah. And there are people who are like, I'm sure it's great. I don't have time, not interested. And the reputation of it is so sing-songy. It's a circles thing. You talked about it. It's like between that and it stops you from getting suspended, like just the amount of that's not true of how it actually works. But again, if you only see, a kid comes home like, yeah, there was some circle and that was it. Well, first of all, you don't really know what the other side is, right? You were involved in a circle and then you went back to class. You don't have any idea what was still going on with the kid or the parents because you can't know. So then it gets a bad rap for it. All it was a circle. Like, you have no idea. And if the circle gave us the information we needed to make decisions, that was great. And we're not here we shouldn't be here for a pound of flesh. Like if there are consequences needed, like, buddy, I get it, but I send you home, see me get back. Okay? So back to you. So yeah, I think it's okay. Because you would influence it how you could. That's your hand up, peripheral.
Just-
Are you like,
Just a bit of insight from a different perspective. If you don't know what this is, and if you have someone coming up to you, I think the intention of the circle is to decrease the psychological size of all the participants, so there's no particular power dynamic. But the problem is, if you don't know what this is, the person who is running this, who knows what it is, automatically ends up with a power dynamic over anybody else who doesn't know. So if it's an incomplete training, or if it's an incomplete rollout, you're automatically going to defeat the nature of the circle itself, at least in the initial phases.
can you give me an example? Are you talking about with kids and teachers, or are you just with adults, or tell me?
I would imagine in general. I mean, if you have kids have no idea what this is, they're going to be blindsided. If you have adults and multiple adults in a circle like this, and we have no idea, we're going to get blindsided. Like, this is helpful, what you've shown here.
Yeah.
But when I came here, I knew nothing about this.
And as we did the circle and did the thing, how are you feeling about talking about what you knew about it?
So that gets into the other thing too, and that's a personality issue. I'm extremely introverted.
understand
I don't like sharing.
Me either. No one believes
I
me.
like
Me
I
either.
like having a little cone around me.
My
I like
husband
being
is-
left alone for the most part.
Me too. Trust me.
So
Ask my husband.
differences in personality
Yeah.
also make a difference when it comes to the circle itself. And that actually leads me to my other question, which I'm sorry, I don't mean to hijack this. I don't want to watch my airtime, but is this going to replace traditional methods of discipline, or is it going to be used in complement with traditional methods of discipline?
Yeah, this is not the discipline. This is the restorative. So it goes with everything. It is not meant to replace. If you get to the questions and you figure out the world, woohoo! Like the young man that cheated on his test, he still had to do some things, but I was also able to get him tutoring, to address the problem. So he still had to do his stuff. He had to write a note, and he had to call his mom, and he had to do the things. But he also got tutoring. So I never saw him again in my office, ever. First to fourth grade. I don't see him anymore. We addressed the issue. And then in terms of introversion and that sort of thing and personality, when you feel like you can lend your voice to a situation, and you want to because you feel strongly, even as an introvert, you appreciate the opportunity to be able to do so. Being able to state your opinion today, it wasn't about the introversion at the time, it was, I have a voice, I have something to say, and I want my questions answered today. And so I'm gonna set my introversion aside to hear my voice. And so this space becomes quite equitable because people get what they need in this space, in this circle, and although I have the knowledge, if I do a good job, everyone has the knowledge they need at the moment to participate. This is the talking tool. Here's the question we're all asking. There's certainly places where you can skip and kids can say, I pass, if they're talking about a subject and that sort of thing. But it is meant to build community in which kids that are highly introverted, don't like to talk, would eventually, in this setting, say, you know what I did yesterday. And that happens where teachers are like, I'm not gonna get excited. She shared 2 months of passing, and then she shares, yesterday this happened to me. You're like, woohoo! You feel safe, to talk about what you did over the weekend. It doesn't have to be repeated. Thank you.
When I participated back in 2017, 18, they had a community voices here, actually, in this particular room, and they had a question on the board, and the way that it was handled to answer your question, that was an excellent question. You did a 30-minute presentation, they kind of did the facilitators kind of did a 5-minute presentation to even explain what restorative is and how, when we did a fishbowl, what a fishbowl was and how it was going to operate. And that opened up, you know, everyone, because you're absolutely right. If everybody just come in and we're in a circle, and the only person that knows what the process is the facilitator, there's not a lot of people that can participate, because you're still thinking back in your mind, okay, what is this? You know, so, I don't know if they had any community voices recently or not, but people that come in and did not know anything about it, the way the facilitator, did the introduction, that did bring everybody to the same place. That was very, everybody was very open, and, you know, even there were, you know, people that didn't care too much for it, but they were able to get their voice in the room, and people that were just gung-ho, you thought that was the next thing, sliced bread, you know, so it was really good to see it in operation. And this was not just, teachers, it was parents, it was community, you know, leaders, and it probably was like 2018, late 17. It was called Community Voices, like right here.
And I think one of the things that's really good about this, when you have a group of people that, you know, may think or feel differently, is you put a subject in the circle, right?
Yeah.
And then you can process through, and everyone gets the equal time that they need, and they feel like they get to say. And she's talking about a circle within a circle, called a fishbowl, where, you know, we could have 4 people in the front, and we're having them process PBIS. And then there'd be an open chair, and then we could step in and out. They are having a conversation, and then we wanted to share. It's called a fishbowl. And people can come in and out of the circle to contribute to that idea or content.
My youngest is now a junior, was doing restorative circles in 5th or 6th grade. I don't know, I lost track of years, but it had been around that time. He's super introverted, but he'd come home and say it was really positive for him because he had an opportunity to talk, and there was a lot of frustrating things going on in that classroom, and he couldn't speak into it in the chaos, but in the circle he could. And he'd come home and tell me about it. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, what's going on there? But it was good for him. On the other side of that, though, I'm wondering about this whole having consequences and traditional discipline, because you heard me say there was chaos in that classroom. Like, it was, like, completely had to evacuate the classroom multiple times a week for kids throwing things and out of control. So, like, so the restorative circle was good, and at the same time, his reading level went down that year from the summer because the class was out of control. So I wonder how you find
restorative practices. If your restorative practices done well, can help increase because you can hear from your peers. That sounds like a classroom teacher who had some, I'll say, significant behavior issues and maybe some classroom management issues. But I wouldn't say it was attributed to restorative practices.
No, I wouldn't think so, but I'm asking how you balance that, I think. I'm sorry for talking.
No, that's okay, classroom management, but there's still a classroom management issue. That was a classroom management. Teachers still, we have to manage our classroom and know when it's the, I mean, it can help. I need to put my foot here and not here. That sounds like some other types of skills that were needed. But in terms of traditional discipline versus restorative practices, I think that if we're doing restorative practices well, you can do all of the things, but still have a good relationship. So you can be suspended, you know, for vaping, and know that the people at school care for you when that was a bad choice. You get consequences. And when you come back, we're not going to treat you like you're the vapor. We're going to treat you like you belong here, you're an FHBS student, you're Central Hawker, Husky, and let's go. Because we know what the research says is if you feel that way, you feel restored back to the community, you have less, you know, it decreases the chance of you doing it again or so frequently, or at least blowing up things, making it such a bigger deal. Because people that feel like the whole world is against them certainly respond worse. It doesn't stop everything, but it certainly decreases the amount of collateral. And again, I say, you know, burn down the village to feel its heat. Still feels better than being ostracized on the outside. And I don't know if you had your hand up too, so I'll come back to you.
Well, going back to some of, there are a couple of questions over here about this. If there is a staff member or your child is in a classroom where they're clearly not doing any sort of restorative practices, and they, let's say, like have a 504 or an IEP, and they're constantly being like reprimanded, constantly being receiving like punishments, it's all very reactive and punitive, which has some concerns with PBIS being a little like unintentionally punitive because you get tickets and you aren't doing well type of thing. And this is more like in my clinical practice, I that they could be having restorative practices, if they were with somebody else or in a different building? Are there any resources for a parent to be able to request that to be included, with their child? Because if they feel like this environment is detrimental to my child, and if there were restorative practices being incorporated in their classroom or with them, I think that they would benefit from that. Are there any resources for parents to?
That's really a great question. I think off the top of my head, I'd love you to have a conversation with the principal and say, I went to a restorative practices conversation, and I think it would be really helpful in the situation that we're in. Any thoughts about that going forward? But it's not like, if the teacher's not doing restorative practices, you should switch classes. They're definitely not saying that. And the principal before, so I did not say that. No, I'm not saying that. But I think you should have that conversation and say, honestly speaking, I went to something I think might be helpful for my kid. You know, I mean, I know you can certainly ask. Now we're in April, so I don't know about all of this, but I think that you should say, I thought it was really helpful. And to the PBIS part, as we're learning, and this is our first year, it certainly is not supposed to be punitive. I try to remind people all the time that the P stands for what? The first word is, it's positive. It is positive. You should spend more time, just like the 80-20, looking for behaviors that we expect. We expect, you know, the persistence and the respect, the inclusivity, the dependability. That's what we're expecting to see. So we're gonna call that out when we see it, instead of waiting until there's an incident to say, no, you're not gonna take it. So that's just us learning the process of people, yes, using it in a punitive manner, but it is done with fidelity. It is not bad at all. It's not supposed to be that. So feel free to talk to me offline or send me an email. I don't mind helping you at all.
I have a first grader, and it's not really my kid's experience.
Well, so there's that purple paper that you went to, and I have a child who, is in kindergarten and has gone through these restorative practices. He was the perpetrator because he just has really some issues. So, what I'm gonna put on that purple paper is maybe a teacher that does continue to have these restorative practices.
Oh, you're talking about,
The paper that says what kind of learning environment you want your child in.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
that's,
Parent input for teachers
Yeah, okay.
for next year.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
Get a purple.
So I can't remember.
No purple
This
paper.
teacher right now is amazing.
Something else. I'm sorry. Then,
And like my daughter was fortunately like on the reparative side, like if something done to her, and the principal definitely was doing this. Like now that I'm looking back, I was like, nicely done, because I actually appreciate it. Well, it came in and talked to me about it, and this is like, you did this, but I didn't know it was like restorative practice.
Vince, and then we have 2 minutes, so I just want to be mindful of Vince. We have one more after that.
Oh, no, go ahead. I can
No,
go later and I
was
can
saying,
write my
just
question
letting you
later.
know what time it was.
Oh, I don't want to, I've spoken a lot, so I mean, I'm more than happy to write my
No,
question.
next hand.
Okay. My concern is about the 20%, the portion where we actually have to address discipline. This sounds like a good way of exposing and understanding, but it seems to have a lack of teeth to it in terms of the actual discipline portion. That's why I wanted to know whether or not there was going to be a merging between this and traditional disciplinary methods, particularly for people, kids or adults, who happen to be a little bit more on the feral side. And who respond more to the carrot and the stick versus the talk it out and try and figure out and sublimate. Not everyone talks it out and sublimates.
No, they don't. 29 years of education, and you're right. Absolutely. So it is, I'm trying to give an example. If there's a fight on the playground, I'm gonna do elementary because that's what I know. There's a fight on the playground. I said this, I did this. You still ask the questions. Well, what happened? Instead of saying, why did you do that? Why did you fight? Which shuts people down. What happened? If you get 2 kids who just had a fight, to explain what happened. So you ask the questions. They're open-ended. You're gonna hear some details, some thoughts, some extra little words. It's fantastic. Well, first I was doing that, and they tell you all, then what were you thinking at the time? Target hit me, whatever. You go through all those things. Now that you understand where the consequences lie, so when you're calling parents and saying, yeah, that was pretty bad, he's gonna need to be picked up. But let me tell you what I found out. He was upset because parents appreciate the fact that I know the why, and I'm not just consequencing and going, had a fight, pick them up, things, click. I am saying, I know exactly what I think to be the reason why he did this. It was something from last week, but somebody snickered about it and set him off. not okay, cannot condone it, but at least I know the why. If you could talk to them about that when you're coming to pick them up. So there is, there is not a substitute when it's needed. So it's a layer that goes with, doesn't take away from, but there are some times when you're talking to a kid and you go through the questions and they're like, well, since the first day of school, and it's March, this kid, and you're like, oh, okay, and you go through, and then, so today, and you're like, oh boy, you know, like, okay, all right, tell me, thank you, that was not okay, that's not how we use our fight, blah, 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 blah. Tell me about the first day of school, and what happened yesterday, and what happened the day before. So now we're having a whole different conversation. Yeah, you did something wrong, we're gonna adjust that. Now I'm getting this whole family in here, because this is not okay. And when you have restorative practices as a layer, you just have a better pulse as an administrator on all the little pieces and parts. You get names thrown in there, you're like, he wasn't a part of this conversation, I'll follow him later to make sure he knows, hey, bud, I know what happened. Let's not. Heard your name, let's make sure it doesn't happen, that won't escalate. Like, so I guess there is no, you can't take one away, because you're gonna have kids who need consequences. The teeth is knowing and trying to make sure it doesn't happen again, and saying, it's only October, this was a big deal. I need you to know you're welcome here from October to June, because we all have to be together in community. If you don't feel that sense of connectedness or belonging, it's gonna be a long year. It's gonna be a long year. Anyway, how do we make sure that, I mean, we know these things are gonna pop up. I'm not surprised when there's recess incidents as a principal, like, it's a regular day at elementary school. They wouldn't share, they wouldn't let me play, like, he was being too aggressive in football today. He took my ball, like, this is normal. How we handle it, decrease the amounts of incidents that turn into harm to a child is what we're after. Yes.
As like kind of going off of what you were saying, from my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the reason for like the 80-20 is because if you put more work into the proactive measures, you wouldn't see as many behavioral, you wouldn't need to get to the discipline part. It's not taking away the discipline, it's adding in all of the extra proactive, like understanding the why behind everything in order to then reduce things. Because, I, in my practice, I've been working with kids and teenagers for like 15 years, and I have yet to find any child who is a carrot and stick individual. That if it's solely punishment and rewards, you're not going to see any real effect or real change. So this is an opportunity to be able to look at like, what is the why where you can feel safe and connected, and also like what's the cause of this, so we can actually do problem solving, which is what I can talk about Dr. later. I don't want to like take up a bunch of time on that, but I think incorporating some of that's a lot of the collaborative problem solving ahead of time, just to reduce behavioral issues.
Right. This is all very, very proactive. We've been talking a lot of minutes about the response, but it is very, very proactive. And when you get to know people, it is hard to make people up. Like, oh, you're an introvert, huh? Me too. No one believes me, but I am, right? Like, we know that about each other. Like, that has us closer in community than we have before we had this circle, right? So I know that about you. You probably don't believe it about me, but my husband is really loud. Like, I'm like, just get me to my room with my book. So it's better when you have time with people, you learn about them, all of the things. There was another hand, sorry.
Yeah, everything you presented here was great. I can definitely get on board and get behind. I think it has to do more with the discipline, right? You talk about what I don't want to see happen. I did with Forest Hills is where specifically Oxford, Mission with that Oxford High with Ethan Crumley, the schools have sort of practices in place on how to discipline kids. Unfortunately, when the administrators and teachers were not able to discipline them or remove them from the class because of some type of restorative practices they were doing there. So that's kind of where I hope Forest Hills, all this, I'm on board with. But when it comes to the discipline, I don't want to see this strip away power from a teacher, an administrator, and a principal, to where if they feel that a child needs to be removed from the classroom, they're not going to be questioned, right? And that's really what. And it's a crazy report. I've gotten through it. There's like a 500-page independent report that recently came out, about the whole Oxford City, so that's the only reason why I kinda came here, to kinda learn more about it.
I appreciate that, and certainly, when you learn anything new, or, my husband yelled at me when we were dating about learning how to drive a stick, you can't forget the, you know, how to drive normally just to learn how to drive a standard shift, right? Like, it's a different thing, you can learn how to drive, you learn to drive a stick, you still have to push gas, you have to go, you have to use your blinkers, and so we still have to be the adults, you know, to adjust to situations, so, yeah, I mean, I understand that as a concern. Yeah, when something, the adult, in the room that's in the situation still is the person that knows what's going on, and they should go with that and not like, okay, like, it's hard because it's not an either or to me, you know?
Sure.
I think you should always be using restorative practices. It doesn't matter what happened over here. You know what I mean? Like, it's not this kid is having an issue, or this child needs to be removed. Remove them. And then when it's time to come back, if they come back, you restore them. Like, you know what I mean? So I just have to, but I understand that, and I'm like, it is, so nobody wants that, and it's not okay to ignore any signals and signs that we as administrators and people who work with kids all day, when you get a sign, you're like, this doesn't seem right. Like, you can certainly ask a question, and once you get an answer that doesn't feel right, what is your next step? Like, you can't throw out what we understand and our experience and knowledge has us follow up on. But I understand that this is not going, so when something feels wrong, have a restorative conversation. There is a process, there is a way that it should be done. Yeah.
You said, somebody is disciplined, and say they're removed, or they have a suspension, or in-school suspension, or any of that, and you say, if they come back or when they come back. What about in the in-between? I'm curious how restorative practice, is there anything that says in in-between, say, it's an in-school suspension, and they're there for 70 hours or whatever, sitting in a room, is there something with restorative practice where you're getting a consequence because of a certain action, but is there a conversation, or is that an opportunity for a principal or a teacher or a counselor to go in there and have a conversation, you know, with the student to help with that restorative process, so that when they do come back the next day or at the end of the day, it's not a missing step, because if they're saying that they're at home on a suspension, like an actual suspension, they're at home, and if they come back or when they come back, what happened while they were gone? Is there anything in the restorative practices that helps with them to feel safe coming back before they come back?
Well, a couple things. One, it would, in a perfect world where everything is rosy, there would be at least two dips, right? There would be, after this thing happened that's causing you to get an in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, you would have had those questions, and that is restorative, because in that time you're like, okay, now how are we gonna make it right? You know, you've got those things. So you should have left a situation in which the consequences were applied, but there was a regular conversation happening. You leave, when you come back before, you know, you spend a day, you spend 2 days, having some time with either a counselor, administrator, someone who says, so, you know, ready? All right, that's over with. Like, to have that restorative, we're ready to go back. Secondary does this really well. You know, I think when someone is re-entering or whatever, but in terms of something in between time, I don't know that there is a requirement to come in and say something, but it depends on the adult. Like, if you're in an in-school suspension room and somebody has RP, they're gonna know that that kid is already in, and we didn't talk about it at all, didn't even start the whole compass of shame and all that. People respond differently when they're called out, right? And they're in trouble, or they have consequence coming. Some people run away, avoid, and some people draw more attention. You're ramping it up or trying to squash it and kind of draw up into it. So we do talk a lot about, like, people that process shame is gonna look different from kid to kid, from running over the table to running out in the street. So anyway, there isn't, I wouldn't say, and in the meantime, because again, I think it's one of those times where, what does a kid need? What does the situation call for? What makes sense? Should I go and reach out? This kid has been there all day. Can somebody go, hey, you good, bud? Did you have lunch yet? Like, have a normal interaction, and that might let that child know, like, yeah, you're already in in-school suspension. You're not gonna be slamming doors and yelling at you. Go get your lunch. Did you already go? You know, like, having that conversation that says, we're all good. Hopefully that would come from an adult, but not as a checklist item necessarily. But there's nothing precluding that from happening. Go ahead, Vince, last question.
I think to build on what this gentleman said, is there any plans for the district or for you and your department to actually have policies drafted for consideration so that the teachers are, and any of the other administrators actually have a clear guidance of your vision, that it's not just restorative practices, but restorative practices are to be harmonized with traditional methods as well? Because I'm not sure that all of the teachers fully understand that. As you're saying there, if the teachers don't understand that and they think that this is actually a replacement for other tools in their toolkit, they may not be actually, you will not have a district wherein the rules and the consequences for those rules are integrated and equally applied through all the levels. In other words, no consistency.
Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, because that brings in PBIS. That's what PBIS is here for, is that consistency. And so that we have a menu, the whole district, for, and it should be showing up also in handbooks, but when we have to write a child up or document behaviors, there's a list that everyone has the same list. Restorative practices is on that list. Actually, someone said, oh, it's last though, why is it last? There's lots of things that can happen, from a parent call to, suspension. Like, there's a list of those, and it doesn't move. There is no way to avoid the list of consequences that you can apply in a situation because it's embedded in the system. So it's there. There's in all of our things, the restorative practice is not the only thing there. It has to be there, just like the state requires, but it should be, in my opinion. But you can't get away from the options to in-school suspension, out of school, retribution, like indoor recess, like all of those things are always present. So I don't know how, when they went to do something in terms of a kid, that the only thing they had as an option is restorative practices. Unless, from the teacher's perspective, as a professional, that this is all it requires. Because I'm getting ready to pull them out. I can handle this like this. We can get back to work. Let me get this done. Let me find out what happened. And you know what? We're going back to work. I'm just going to email parents later. That's a phone call after school. So it looked like it was done in that moment, but the teacher after school called the parents. So you know what I mean? So I guess it's both. Could it be the thing? Yes. Is it the only thing? No. But there is a list that you can't avoid. If you're looking to do restorative practices or looking to write a student up or anything, all of those, what you were saying is traditional options, are always present as an option. Does that make sense?
But I guess my question is, are the teachers aware of this list? Is there a place where it's written down? Do they know that they have the authority to choose anything on the list that they want a la carte?
Yeah, especially with PBIS, again, which is very helpful to restart that, because there's something called, it's literally called a behavioral response continuum. And it says, from here to there, here are all the different responses you have. Restorative practices is definitely on that list, but it's a list. I did bring this in because, well, it's different from, this is what the state has, 7 factors, but this is not, that's not what the teachers have, but there's always the entire list present. Yeah. Oh, so when you're suspending, this is like for suspension or expulsion though, the state says, hey, check on the student's age, the disciplinary history, the disability, seriousness of behavior, is it a safety risk? Did you use restorative practice or use of restorative practice, and the level of intervention. And that is what you're supposed to consider before you suspend or expel a kid. So that's not day-to-day life. I'm always in the classroom, but that is that. I got this because the other side of it are the restorative questions. That's why I brought it.
Is that in the handbook?
I believe so. The restorative questions, or the thing that the state has.
Student handbook? Or?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is kind of a cheat sheet for when we have to suspend a kid, so it's like an administrator cheat sheet. I've had this since I was a principal. I like it because of efficient paper, but the questions are on the other side. So the what happened and what you thinking at the time. But when you're suspending this.
And sorry, real quick, to answer your question, I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but in restorative practices training, you would go through that portion of, this is just a supplement to understand, and there still will be consequences for behavior as part of that training.
Yes.
And all teachers would, so that was my one question.
Oh.
What does a restorative district look like? Meaning everybody's trained.
Yes.
Okay.
And people know how to apply it and when it's not the time, because sometimes it's a time to, remove a child from a situation and we catch restorative on the back end. Like that's just real life. Like right now, you're not even regulated. We can't even have this conversation, you're so upset. You're not having the four questions when someone is boo-hooing. People have to get calm. We have to be in a state at which the 4 questions actually can be answered. So yes, those types of things would normally drive in a car, like, let's do the normal things first before we, there, yeah.
Super teeny tiny suggestion. If this gets implemented and this becomes a district, my only suggestion would be have it written down somewhere. Have a handbook that people can go and refer to, because a 2-day lesson, they'll remember it for a while. Everyone will remember it for a while, but memories fade over time.
Yeah. So when you take the training, you do get a list of resources. That's a Google Doc that has lots of links, handbooks, videos, and things like that when you take the training.
Can that be made available to the general public?
Well, I give you a hint, a lot of the videos are on YouTube. They're just restorative practices in different school districts that are implementing, like, I would suggest you go there, but yeah, I don't see why that's a big deal to look at the resources. It shows you how to run a circle, you know, right, like that little square that says, what's your topic? You know, write down the questions.
I think it comes down more to the flavor of the individual community, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. And so Forest Hills community is going to be different than some of the other places that you see on the internet.
Absolutely. So, but exactly. So the paper, and that's why it's like people don't hand out things without context, right? Like you can do it, but the first thing I'm going to get is a whole bunch of people. So tell me how you use that. And it's like, well, that's why you need the training. So I think that's why people hedge, because people can take it out of context if you're not in this situation. And where I said we had a whole conversation over an hour in a circle and it was fine. Like all the voices are being heard. We're still getting our work done, but we didn't have a table in front of us. People are like, oh, that sounds weird. I'm like, no, it's fine. We all got to talk, right? So I mean, giving you videos in the context, we're doing Forest Hills context right now. But yeah, but I'm really glad. I don't know if you can tell, I like it. I'm in favor of it. I think it's awesome. So anytime you want to talk about it, let me know. I'm interested, but we're not there. But it was something that a parent, said, this is something we'd like to know more about, so let's talk about it, but don't want you to leave here going, yeah, you should be doing restorative practice, we heard you should be. Well, it hasn't been required, so there's this balance of, it's good stuff, it's great, and, and life happening between now and then, and it being expected, or someone who did this back in 2017, and it's been a while, and they maybe stopped using it. It definitely feels like a use it or lose it thing, but I think having these conversations are important. And so you have access to my email. Good. If you want to email, if you want to give me a call, again, I'd love to. If you want to talk about some specific situations, I'm interested in that too. But I appreciate your thoughts and concerns. You being here lets me know, it makes me understand how much you care about your kids in the district, and that's what we're here for. So.
Totally got nothing to do, because I was weak for great behavior.
Absolutely. So exactly. Buddy, if you ever get in a circle, we're having a conversation. Unless they're a witness, sometimes it's helpful. Thank you all so much for coming. If you have questions, you can put them on the table, or jar. If you have any questions or follow-up, if you think of something, let me know.
So you don't have a concert tonight you gotta get to?
No, guess what? I thought it was tonight. It's Thursday.